They found it. Hey, that's good problem having. These things. We're just talking down here with last week too, and Brunswick County, they're suffering. Yeah. I don't know what the stages are. Clay says we are ready. Good evening. Welcome to Stony Point Baptist Church. We have had another beautiful Lord's Day, and the perfect way to end that perfect day is in His house to worship Him in spirit and in truth. We're glad you've come our way. We do want to begin our service with a season of prayer, remembering those of our number with special needs and special concerns. Do we have any to add to our prayer list this evening? Say it again, Ron. Michael had cataract surgery. On one eye. How is he doing? Is he doing fine? All right. He may not think that, but my hearing aids, both the batteries died. So if you want to tell me anything, you need to speak up. But anyhow, any others?
My cousin Tiffany, she's on our prayer list.
Yes.
She's not doing well. She has to be taken this afternoon. She's been tired for 4 days. They cannot get her ammonia level down.
She had to go back to Winston.
Yeah.
Let's remember her.
Very weak.
Anyone else?
I had an MRI today, and I can't believe the results. I mean, I don't understand all this. I go next week to the doctor, but my hip, I have bones for a lot of arthritis and praying of the. I don't know exactly what all that.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Anyone else? Sharon and I have two good friends. Ginger Sheely is headed for Chapel Hill, the hospital there, for cancer surgery on Friday. And Gene Sanders, that we mentioned before, is going to be going to Duke the next week. So we would ask you to keep both those in your prayers as well. Yeah, a lady at Country Grace also has battling leukemia, and she did not get a good report. So Miller, yeah, Ronnie Miller. Ronnie grew up here in Stony Point. You may remember him, but Milladine was from the Loudoun area. Anyone else? If not, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Brother Don, if you would lead us in that prayer. We ask your will be done in all these respects. You know each prayer, you know each need. Please be with them and give them peace. Healing, worship, your Lord, and blessing in all of us. Thank you for the rain you've sent us, Lord, and thank you for loving us. Pray. Amen. Sandra, do you want to say something about the play? Do you need some more?
Yeah.
He got his hearing aid. Heard Lincoln, but that is selective hearing, which, by the way, hearing aids don't help with.
I'm excited about our club. I think it's going to be powerful, and I hope that we'll be praying for people that are going to be here.
I think so too. I really do. Daniel chapter 6. Just some things to remember in review. The Aramaic portion of Daniel. Chapter 2, verse 4 through chapter 7, verse 28 was written to demonstrate to all who would read it the dominion and sovereignty of God over all of creation for all of time. That's the primary reason for these deliverance stories. The deliverance of the faithful is the primary theme. Daniel and the three decided, purposed in their heart. I love the way the King James says that. Purposed in their heart that they would not eat the food from the king's table because it had been offered to idols. Then Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah refused to bow to the statue of gold, went through the fiery furnace. Tonight, Daniel refuses to pray to Darius instead of God, and we see what happens. But through faith, God releases all our earthly bondage. So, verses 1 through 9. Darius decided to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, stationed throughout the realm, and over them 3 administrators, including Daniel. These satraps would be accountable to them so that the king would not be defrauded. Daniel distinguished himself above the administrators and satraps because he had an extraordinary spirit. So the king planned to set him over the whole realm. The administrators and satraps therefore kept trying to find a charge against Daniel regarding the kingdom, but they could find no charge or corruption. He was trustworthy, and no negligence or corruption was found in him. Then these men said, "We will never find any charge against this Daniel unless we find something against him concerning the law of his God." So the administrators and satraps went together to the king and said to him, "May King Darius live forever." All the administrators of the kingdom, the prefects, the satraps, the advisors, and governors have agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an edict that for 30 days, anyone who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den. Therefore, your majesty, establish this edict and sign the document so that as a law of the Medes and Persians, it is irrevocable and cannot be changed. So Darius signed the edict. So here's the plot. Just to give us a timeline, Thora, Darius ruled the Medes and the Persian Empire until 536 BC. Now, the Medes and the Persians conquered Babylon in 539 BC. So he was only there either a little over 2 years or almost 3 years before Darius died. So this event must have occurred during that 3-year period when Darius was king. He patterned his government exactly as it had been before they conquered Babylon. He reorganized it, but it was patterned exactly the same. He moved the Median capital from Ecbatana in the mountains of Persia, which is now Iran, to Babylon. And to cover the entire kingdom, he appointed 120 satraps. Now, there's absolutely no definition for that term except a low-tier government official. So we can understand from this verse where it says they will be accountable to the king, or accountable to the president, so the king would not be defrauded. They've got to have something to do with tax collection, got to have something to do with bringing funds into the kingdom. And since taxation is the primary way, then that's what it is. Up over these 120, 3 administrators were appointed, and the satraps reported to the administrators. Daniel was one of those 3. Daniel, as usual, there's a lot of duplicity in this with the story of Joseph. Joseph and Daniel, both in foreign countries, both of them not in control, and both of them, because of their faith and belief in God, were elevated to very, very powerful positions. So Daniel quickly caught the king's attention, and due to God's hand resting on him as a result of his faithfulness, Darius planned to make him the second in command. Maybe we could call him the prime minister to the king. Whatever his title may have been, he would answer to no one except Darius or the king, and everybody else would answer to him. So his reputation for honesty, trustworthiness, and integrity, the other administrators and satraps sought a way to discredit Daniel and have him removed. It seems like It seems like we've had just crooks in government for all the time, doesn't it? I mean, this was their reason for getting him. They wanted to be able to pad their own pockets along with it. Now, keep in mind how the tax collectors in the time of Jesus worked. Uh, Matthew was one of the tax collectors along a main thoroughfare. Now, Rome set a minimal tax. They had to charge this much, but they could the tax collectors themselves could add to that, and then they could keep the extra, and that was their pay. And I guess it was just whatever the market would allow. If it was a large caravan, it'd be a large amount of money. If it's just a couple of people, it might not be as much. But it was whatever the market would bear is how much they could charge. And I'm sure this was the same way. So here's the plan. Let's make the king feel good about himself. And we all like to be told you've done good. Yeah, we do. Everybody likes to hear, that's a good job. You did really well at that. You painted that really pretty. You fixed that really well. Things have gone good. Everybody likes to hear that. Convince him that everybody in the government, including Daniel, wanted this to happen. Now, he was going to elevate the king to God status for 30 days. Unlike Rome, Persia, the Medes and Persian Empire, did not have emperor worship. They were polytheistic. In other words, they worshiped many gods, like the Greeks did, and the Romans did as well, but the Roman emperors wanted to be considered as gods. Some of the early kings in the Achaemenid dynasty did attempt to establish emperor worship, but it was not successful. The primary religion, still around today, Zoroastrianism. That was their primary religion for the Medes and the Persians. And the basic belief is that there is a cosmic struggle going on between good and bad. Sounds similar to ours, doesn't it? Similar to ours. They have a creator god whose name was Ahura Mazda, and an evil spirit, Angra Mainya, and these two battle. These two struggle. They do have core ethical. We have core ethics in Christianity. As you would that men should do to you, do you unto them likewise. The golden rule. We should treat others we want to be treated. We obey those 10 commandments and the law of hospitality and all those things that go with it. They had this code of ethics: good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. Here's where they differ. If the people were to do these good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, it would help their creator God to overcome evil in the latter days. We know that our God doesn't depend on us to overcome evil. We're just there because we're blessed and because his blood was shed for us, and he cared enough to take us along. We are not his soldiers in this battle until it comes that final day, when those of us that have gone on will come back to be with him. Now, so what we want you to do, King, is make yourself a mediator between your people and these gods, so that everybody comes to you with their needs, their wants, their desires for 30 days. And anybody who does not do that, as an incentive to get them to participate, anyone who does not do that will get an all expense paid trip to the lion's den. Yeah, that's better than Price is Right. So only worship and pray to Darius for 30 days. Here's the catch. While the king himself was not the final word, in other words, he could not sign something into law without the approval of these people that he has appointed. They have to agree with it. The Medes and the Persians had this setup. It's sort of a parliamentary setup, not like it is in England because the king's just a puppet there. But here the king has to sign the edict, but it has to be agreeable to the parliament, so to speak. So once it's signed, it becomes irrevocable. It cannot be done away with. It's ironclad. This is illustrated in Esther chapter 1, verse 19, and chapter 8, verse 8. And then it's also recorded in the secular history by a fellow by the name of Diodorus, who lived in Sicily, in his histories, volume 17, section 30. Daniel response, verse 10. When Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he went into his house. The windows in his upstairs room opened toward Jerusalem, and 3 times each day he got down on his knees, prayed, and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and imploring Yahweh. So they approached the king. And they said, "Didn't you sign an edict that for 30 days any person who petitions a god or a man except you, the king, will be thrown to the lions?" The king answered, "As the law of the Medes and Persians, the order stands. It is irrevocable." Then they said to him, "Daniel, one of the Judean exiles, has ignored you, the king, and the edict you signed, for he prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was very displeased. He set his mind on how to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to deliver him. But these men went together to the king and said to him, "You know, your majesty, that it is a law of the Medes and the Persians that an edict and ordinance the king establishes cannot be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. And the king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you." A stone was brought, placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing in regard to Daniel could be changed. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and he could not sleep. When Daniel learned that the document had been signed, what did he do? He immediately went to the place that he always went to 3 times a day and did exactly what he did every day, 3 times a day, knelt toward Jerusalem and prayed to his God. There was never any doubt about what he was going to do. This had been established years before, when he was just a youth and had been brought to Babylon. This character was already established. He was not going to turn his back. He respected the king, but he worshiped God. He wouldn't even think about praying. So he knelt in prayer, facing Jerusalem. Now, this may sound just a little bit strange to you, because facing Jerusalem, why was he facing Jerusalem? Rabbinical records tell us that this was an instruction. And indeed, in 1 Kings, let's see if I can find that. In 1 Kings, Solomon gave instruction on what should be done. 1 Kings 8, verses 44 through 49. When your people go out to fight against their enemies, wherever you send them, and they pray to the Lord in the direction of the city you have chosen and the temple I have built in your name, may you hear their prayer and petition in heaven and uphold their cause. When they sin against you, and there is no one who does not sin, and you are angry with them, and to hand them over to the enemy, and their captors deport them to the enemy's country, whether distant or nearby, and when they come into their senses in the land where they are deported, and repent and petition you in their captors' land, and say, we have sinned and done wrong, we have been wicked, and when they return to you with all their heart and their soul in the lands of their enemies who took them captive, when they pray to you in the direction of their land that you gave their ancestors, the city you have chosen, and the temple I built in your name, may you hear in heaven, your dwelling place, their prayer and petition, and uphold their cause. So Solomon gives them instructions of how this is to be done. Naturally, these other satraps and administrators are waiting for Daniel to pray. It's interesting. Just read recently, John Wesley's house in Britain is open. John Wesley, one of the founders of the Wesleyan and Methodist Church, and they say that the tour leads you to one of the rooms, his private room where he went to pray, and that the wooden boards in that room show 2 indentations where his knees had been for so long, that he had knelt on those wooden boards so long that it had worn out a groove in them. And in that room, there's also a plaque that was one of his statements recorded. It said, men do not come to hear me preach. They come to see me burn. In other words, they're coming to see if he was on fire for Christ. If that's not conviction, I don't know what is. We should all be in that mannerism. People should not come to hear us, but to watch us burn. So, Daniel's enemies see him. Daniel's betrayed. And Darius recognizes that he has been deceived. And these administrators remind him that the Medes and the Persian law is irrevocable. So he takes Daniel and they put him in the den. And his last words to Daniel that day were, may your God whom you continually serve rescue you. And they put him in the den. Now, I know all these pictures that you see of Daniel in the lion's den. You remember the ones you see when you were in the beginner's class, had the story on the back, and the teacher would hold it up and you see the picture and she'd read it off the back. Yeah, they always showed pictures of African lions. They always also show Daniel's being a young man. Daniel's between 84 and 90 years of age when this happened. He was not a young man. And these were not African lions. These were Asiatic lions. Not quite as big as their African cousins. Usually about 3.5 feet tall. That's still a big cat. And weighing between 250 and 400 pounds. I wouldn't want to feed one. Feeding the Great Pyrenees is enough. So the interesting thing about these two was that these Asiatic lions were often kept in royal households as pets. I'm not too certain about that either. I guess I'd rather have a lion as a snake. I don't understand people who have snakes as pets. Do you? I mean, a snake, you can tell from a snake's head, it does not have enough brain to love you. It doesn't. You can tell from a cat's actions, they don't have enough care to love you. Honestly, dogs and horses are mules sometimes, and a bottle-fed goat. A bottle-fed goat will love you, I mean, like nothing else ever loved you. But that's about it. You go to these other things and you have to wonder about it. So every indication is that these lions were not pets that were in this den. As a matter of fact, this was a common form of execution among the empire. Herodotus Histories, Volume 3, Section 119, details that. He also tells us that in general, when an execution was about to occur, that the lions would not be fed for several days prior to that. so that the desired result can be achieved. Uh, I don't know if they had time to starve the lions in this particular case, but nonetheless, everybody was confident that Daniel was done. Darius, it says, spent the night fasting. He didn't have any music, no diversions, no dancing girls, none of the things and he didn't get any sleep. Darius was worried about Daniel. Why? Because he trusted Daniel more than anybody else. Daniel had his confidence. So, verse 19. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he reached the den, he cried out in anguish to Daniel, Daniel, you servant of the living God, has your God, whom you continually serve, been able to rescue you from the lions? Then Daniel spoke, May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. They haven't harmed me, for I was found innocent before him and also before you, your majesty. I have not done harm. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to take Daniel out of the den. When Daniel was brought up from the den, he was found to be unharmed, for he trusted in his God. The king then gave the command, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought, thrown into the lion's den, they, their children, and their wives. They had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Daniel, has your God been able to save you? He went at daybreak. He was sitting there waiting until, now keep in mind, ancient peoples in the Near East or the Middle East and Near East time their days from dawn till dusk and from dusk till dawn. So he could not have gone at 12 midnight when our new day starts. He had to wait until the sun arrived to signal that the new day had started before he could check to see if the sentence had been carried out. So at the first light of dawn, he went to find Daniel, and the Bible says in anguish, he asked this. And Daniel said, May the king live forever. My God sent his angel. He shut their mouths. He sheathed their claws. Daniel was not touched. Oliver B. Green said that in his commentary that he thought this might be the best sleep that Daniel had had the whole time he'd been in Babylon. You know, I don't know about that, but I'm pretty certain that in my head, what I've got to seeing is Daniel got his head laid on one line while the rest of them keep him warm. You know, like having, best heating blankets in the world. Not a scratch, no tears in his clothing. Think about the similarities here between the furnace and the pit. The three Hebrew children, when they came out of that furnace, the only thing that burned was the bonds that they were tied with. Their clothes didn't even smell like smoke. Not a hair was singed. They looked better when they came out than when they were thrown in. When Daniel comes out, he's had a good night's rest. Darius is worried. He's got bags under his eyes. He's concerned. Daniel says, why did you worry? This is it. Angel, verse 22. God has sent his angel. A lot of people say this was Christ himself. I can't say it is or it wasn't. I know the word there that's used as angel is Malachi. And literally it means one who is sent or a messenger. It's a very generic term. There is no concrete evidence that Jesus was in that lion's den that night. I think he was in the fiery furnace. I'm not certain about the den just because of the reference. Darius was overjoyed. The king was overjoyed. Gave orders to take Daniel out of the den. No harm to Daniel. And then he remembered what had happened. And he said, okay, go get all the rest of those rascals. Bring their wives, bring their children. Now we're talking about 120, and then 2 administrators, that's 122. We're talking about that, at least that many wives. Because keep in mind, they could have more than one, at least that many wives. So 122 and 122 is what, 244? Then children, I believe we're safe to say there's probably 300 people got cast into the lion's den that day. And what does the Bible say? They had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions had overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Literally devoured 250 plus people, while Daniel walked away unharmed. Verse 25. Then King Darius wrote to those of every people, nation, and language who live on the whole earth, may your prosperity abound. Here is my decree. In all my royal dominion, people must tremble in fear before the God of Daniel. He is the living God. He endures forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed. His dominion has no end. He rescues and delivers. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. And he has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. All must honor the God of Daniel. Now, understand, the wording here does not say that Darius admitted that there was only one true living God. All this tells us is that Darius said he's a God, and probably just one of a many gods, but he's real. He's real. He has great power, and we need to tremble before him. So, what does this say to us? The key to this entire chapter is verse 10. Verse 10. When Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he went into his house. The windows in its upstairs room opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Just as he had done before. Godly victories come from faith. They come from confidence in God that doesn't waver. Daniel's faith had been on display for more than 70 years. Everybody that knew anything about Daniel in Babylon knew this about him. They knew that you could trust what he said. They knew that God had smiled on him. They knew that the Spirit of God rested upon him. They knew that God gave him specific and special talents and abilities. And this had been established. God's victory springs from a faith and confidence that doesn't waver. Doesn't waver. Makes me think about that old Negro spiritual, like a tree that's planted by the waters, I shall not be moved. You know, not be moved, no matter what happened. It also shows us that when you do the right thing, it rarely makes you popular. It rarely makes you popular. But when you stand for the Lord, you always find his favor. He never lets us down. And yes, you may find yourself in a fiery furnace, or even in a lion's den sometime, or something very similar in our world today. But Christian, no matter what kind of trial and tribulation you find yourself in, you will never, ever be there alone. You will never be there alone. He will always be with you. He may not spare you. He may not spare you, but he will deliver you. He will deliver you. You think about what is the worst thing that could happen on this earth. and compare it to what he has assured for us in his promise, and everything just sort of pales. Because his promise is eternal, his promise is secure. We serve a God that never fails. We serve a God that is for us 100% of the time. Any questions or comments?
I know, I mean, I think I know the answer too, but once they kill his children.
That sounds really harsh, doesn't it? It really does. Herodotus again records that this was common. That they figured that if one man did something, if the man did something wrong, that the entire family needed to be just wiped out. That they didn't need to be carried on. And that's all the only kind of answer I can give you is that it's recorded to be a common theme in those times. But I don't know how many of you in the choir listen to our Methodist, global Methodist brother. I want to make that clear. Our global Methodist brother last night when he said that the Ninevites were cruel and would skin people alive. Why would they do that? And all of us have seen that Westerns, where the Indians buried white men up to their neck and left them out in the desert. You know, cruelties abound everywhere. That's not to say what we did to them, or what y'all did to me. Anyhow, any other questions or comments? Anybody have anything?
So that he was trying to force people to be good.
Yeah, maybe. That would be enough to cause somebody if you knew your children were going to be wiped out as well. That might influence your activities a whole lot. It might.
They did it too, so family wouldn't seek revenge. They just killed everybody down to the last drop of blood. Children, anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? If not, Brother Robert, you dismiss us.
Thank you, Father. For your word, Father. Clear situation may come forth. Follow your will, Father. Thanks for the rain, Father. Most of all, Lord, thank you, love us.